If you thought the British royal family had finally managed to sweep their messiest, most explosive secrets under those plush palace rugs, think again, because what King Charles just uncovered in the back of Queen Camilla's son's car trunk isn't just a scandal. It is an absolute nuclear meltdown inside Buckingham Palace. Imagine the sheer, jaw-dropping horror when the monarch himself lifts a sleek black trunk lid after a high-stakes palace banquet, only to find folders marked Diana Confidential, sitting right next to Tom Parker Bowles' gourmet cheese samples and designer luggage. We are talking about Princess Diana's private handwritten letters, classified government briefs, and sensitive personal files floating around in the back of a food critic's sedan. And if you think Charles looking like he saw a ghost was dramatic, wait until you hear Prince William's explosive reaction. The heir to the throne didn't just demand answers. He drew a line in the royal marble and issued a shocking ultimatum that could completely tear the monarchy apart. What on earth is Camilla's son actually doing with Diana's most guarded secrets? Was this just an innocent book project gone horribly wrong? Or something far more sinister brewing inside Camilla's inner circle? Before we unpack William's unbelievable next move and the frantic cover-up happening behind closed palace doors, make sure you smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop your thoughts below, because trust me, you are going to want to stay tuned for every single second of this absolute royal nightmare. Let us set the scene properly, because the sheer absurdity of how this explosive confrontation unfolded makes the entire situation read like a rejected political thriller script. We are talking about the night of a grand royal banquet at Buckingham Palace, an event meticulously engineered to showcase the absolute peak of British stability, elegance, and soft power. Golden chandeliers throwing warm light across vaulted ceilings, world leaders sipping fine wine, foreign diplomats rubbing shoulders with Hollywood royalty, and every single fork placement calculated down to the millimeter. This was supposed to be King Charles's grand moment to show the world that despite years of relentless family feuds, health scares, and endless media fires, the crown was steady, dignified, and firmly under his control. Prince William and Catherine walked into the ballroom looking absolutely immaculate, with Catherine wearing a stunning deep emerald gown that caught every camera flash in the courtyard, radiating the exact kind of poised royal perfection the palace PR team praised for every night. Charles and Camilla entered hand in hand, Camilla shimmering in a silver gown, smiling warmly as the crowd cheered politely. And then, pulling up to the royal courtyard in a sleek black sedan, looking crisp, sharp, and utterly unbothered, was Tom Parker Bowles. Now, to the average onlooker or casual royal observer, Tom Parker Bowles is just Queen Camilla's son from her previous marriage, a well-known food critic, restaurant reviewer, and author who writes passionately about artisanal cheeses, Sunday roasts, and culinary history. He is a man whose entire professional identity revolves around describing the texture of truffle butter and rating high-end London eateries. But inside the hypersensitive, deeply protective world of Prince William, Tom Parker Bowles has never been just another guest on the VIP list. He is the living, breathing reminder of the most painful chapter in modern royal history. He represents the ultimate integration of Camilla's family into the very heart of the British monarchy, a reality that William has had to silently swallow for decades while putting on a brave face for the official palace photographs. Sources close to the royal household report that the moment William spotted Tom stepping out of that car, his jaw went tight, his shoulders locked, and his entire demeanor shifted into cold, watchful vigilance. While Harry chose to live thousands of miles away across the Atlantic in California, completely absent from these forced family reunions, William was stuck right there in the middle of it, watching Camilla's inner circle enjoy the fruits of a kingdom his late mother, Princess Diana, was once destined to share. Throughout the dinner, the tension underlying the grand banquet was thick enough to cut with a silver butter knife. While a string orchestra played softly in the balcony and ministers chatted idly over candlelit tables covered in white linen, Tom sat only a few seats away from King Charles, laughing easily, drinking wine, and entertaining guests with colorful stories about his culinary adventures. To some of the visiting foreign dignitaries, Tom was charming, laid back, and relatable, the perfect breath of fresh air in a room filled with rigid protocol. But to Prince William, sitting further down the table, that booming, comfortable laughter felt completely out of place. It felt like an intrusion, a sound that did not belong in the historic halls of Buckingham Palace. William barely touched his meal, spending the entire evening engaging in polite, rehearsed small talk while keeping a sharp eye on the dynamic between his father, Camilla, and her son. The banquet was a total facade of unity, a carefully scripted performance for the cameras, while beneath the surface, years of buried resentment, unspoken grief, and deep-seated rivalry were boiling toward an inevitable explosion. When the banquet finally wrapped up late into the night, and the high-profile guests began filtering out into the cool London air, King Charles excused himself from Camilla, mentioning that he needed a moment of quiet and a breath of fresh air after hours of grueling diplomatic socializing. The king walked down the long, echoing marble corridors of the palace, his heavy footsteps sounding off the historic walls, and stepped out into the crisp, quiet atmosphere of the private courtyard. Palace security guards stood rigid at their posts, silent and ever watchful under the dim glow of the vintage courtyard lanterns. A line of pristine black luxury sedans sat parked in order, waiting to escort various high-ranking attendees home. That is when Charles's eyes caught something distinctly wrong. Parked near the edge of the private exit was Tom Parker Bowles' vehicle, and its trunk lid was not fully latched. It was open just a tiny fraction of an inch, an almost invisible gap, but in a place like Buckingham Palace, where elite security protocols dictate that every single inch of a vehicle is swept, checked, and secured, an unlatched trunk stands out like a flare in the night. Charles frowned, feeling a sudden pang of annoyance at what he assumed was simple carelessness from his stepson. He glanced around the quiet courtyard, saw that no security personnel were immediately hovering nearby, and stepped closer to the vehicle to press the trunk lid down himself. But curiosity got the better of the king. He hesitated for a brief second, reached out, and lifted the heavy trunk lid all the way up. What he saw sitting inside under the soft courtyard light did not just shock him, it paralyzed him. Tucked beneath a dark velvet cloth, sandwiched between expensive overnight bags and stacks of food manuscripts, were thick bundles of aged paper, confidential government folders, and sealed envelopes tied neatly with classic red string. The documents bore official security stamps from various state departments dating back decades. And sitting right on top, as if it had been deliberately placed there to draw the eye, was a single faded manila folder with thick black marker writing across the front cover that read, "Diana Confidential." Charles staggered backward, his face turning completely pale, his chest heaving as his breath hitched in his throat. His mind scrambled to process the horrific impossibility of what he was staring at. How could sensitive classified files concerning his late wife, Princess Diana, be sitting in the trunk of a civilian car parked inside Buckingham Palace? Before Charles could even form a coherent thought or reach down to touch the folder, heavy, rapid footsteps echoed across the stone courtyard behind him. A sharp, commanding voice cut through the quiet night air, freezing the king in his tracks. "Father, what on earth are you doing?" Charles spun around to see Prince William marching toward him, his brow furrowed in confusion. But as William closed the distance and his gaze shifted past his father toward the wide-open trunk of Tom's car, the confusion on the Prince of Wales' face instantly vaporized, replaced by a terrifying, violent wave of pure shock and unbridled fury. William lunged forward, his eyes locking onto the Diana Confidential label with terrifying intensity. The prince's hands trembled with rage as he pointed directly into the trunk, his voice dropping into a dangerous, shaking register that made the surrounding air feel instantly frigid. He looked at his father, then back at the open trunk, utterly unable to comprehend how his mother's deepest personal records were sitting in the back of Queen Camilla's son's private vehicle. William didn't just ask for an explanation. He demanded an immediate, uncompromising account of how such explosive material ended up there. The sheer speed with which the atmosphere transformed from a royal celebration into a full-scale constitutional nightmare was breathtaking. The heir to the throne was standing in the dark palace courtyard, staring at the evidence of an unfathomable breach of privacy, while the King of England stood frozen, completely unable to defend the sudden, catastrophic reality that had just unraveled right beneath his feet. Tom Parker Bowles stepped out into the courtyard just moments later, brushing a piece of lint off his jacket, entirely unaware that his life was about to split wide open right there on the cobblestones. The smile on his face vanished instantly when he saw King Charles standing pale and motionless, and Prince William towering over the back of his car, eyes locked on him with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. Before Tom could even offer a polite greeting, William closed the distance between them, his posture rigid and menacing, his voice cutting through the damp night air like a blade. "Explain this right now," William demanded, pointing a trembling finger back at the open trunk. "Why are my mother's private files, confidential government reports, and personal handwritten letters sitting in the back of your car at Buckingham Palace? Don't you dare lie to me, Tom. Where did you get these, and what are you doing with them?" Tom backed up half a step, raising his hands in a frantic gesture of defense, his eyes wide with genuine panic as he realized the sheer magnitude of the catastrophe unfolding before him. "I didn't steal them. I swear to you, I didn't take anything," Tom stammered, his voice rising sharply as he tried to find his footing under William's ferocious gaze. "I was given those documents by a contact, someone who deals in rare literary manuscripts and historical papers. He brought them to me a few weeks ago claiming he had acquired them through an estate sale, and he told me people would pay millions for the information inside. I didn't even believe him at first, William. I took them because I wanted to verify what they were, to keep them safe until I knew how to handle it. I was going to talk to the family." William let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the cold palace walls, a sound filled with utter disbelief and contempt. "Keeping them safe?" William shouted, stepping even closer, completely disregarding royal protocol, or the guards watching in stunned silence from the perimeter. "You kept them safe by throwing them into the trunk of your car, and driving them into Buckingham Palace on the night of a state banquet? Do you think I am stupid, Tom? Do you expect anyone on this planet to believe that confidential state files and my mother's personal letters were just handed to a food writer for a literary evaluation? You write about restaurants. You review cheese and roast chicken. What on earth does any of this have to do with you?" Charles finally found his voice, stepping between his son and his stepson, his hands trembling as he tried desperately to de-escalate a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of control. "William, please lower your voice," Charles pleaded, his voice raspy and choked with emotion. "We need to handle this calmly and quietly. We cannot have a scene here in the courtyard where staff and security can hear us." But William turned on his father with a look so sharp it made the king wince. "Calmly? You want me to be calm, father? Look at what is sitting in his trunk. These are not historical artifacts. These are my mother's private thoughts, her personal fears, documents from the darkest periods of her life. And they are sitting here like junk in the back of Camilla's son's vehicle." Tom tried once again to interject, his face flushed and sweating despite the cold air. "William, listen to me. I was told these papers were relevant to a broader book project I was researching on royal history and palace culture. I didn't know the full extent of what was in those folders until I started looking through them. I was going to bring them to a secure location." But William cut him off before he could even finish the sentence, pointing a finger directly at Tom's chest. "A book project? You expect my father and me to believe that someone handed you classified royal files so you could use them in a cookbook? That is the most pathetic, insulting lie I have ever heard in my life. You are exploiting my mother's name, or worse, you were planning to use these to profit off her memory." With trembling hands, King Charles reached into the open trunk and picked up one of the faded brown envelopes. His fingers shook violently as he slid out a piece of aged, elegant stationery. As his eyes scanned the handwritten ink, the king's face drained of what little color was left. It was unmistakable. The distinct, flowing handwriting belonged to Princess Diana. It was a letter written during the height of the media storm in the 1990s, filled with raw emotion, deep personal anguish, and terrifyingly intimate details about her fears regarding her safety, her marriage, and the palace establishment. Charles closed his eyes, a pained gasp escaping his lips as he held the paper against his chest, looking suddenly like an old, broken man weighed down by the ghost he had spent decades trying to outrun. William watched his father's reaction, the anger in his chest transforming into a cold, unbreakable resolve. He looked at Charles, then at Tom, and then back at the envelope in his father's hands. "This ends tonight," William said, his tone dropping from fiery anger to a chilling, absolute certainty. "You have spent years asking me to accept this family dynamic, asking me to welcome Camilla and her children into our lives with open arms, pretending that everything is fine for the sake of the crown. But this is the absolute limit. If you try to cover this up, Father, if you try to protect Tom or shield Camilla's family from the consequences of having my mother's private letters locked in a car trunk, you will lose me completely. I will not stand by and watch her memory be desecrated by the people who replaced her." That statement was not just an emotional outburst. It was a devastating political threat that struck right at the heart of the modern monarchy. If Prince William, the popular modern face of the royal family, publicly broke ranks with King Charles over the handling of Princess Diana's legacy, the public fallout would be catastrophic. The Crown, already navigating delicate political waters and shifting public opinions, could not survive an open war between the king and the heir to the throne. Charles looked at William with pleading eyes, completely torn between his deep love for his eldest son and his desperate desire to protect his wife, Queen Camilla, and her family from a scandal that could utterly ruin them. While Charles stood frozen in agony, William pulled out his mobile phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen as he stepped away from the car. "I am giving you until morning to figure out how you are going to explain this," William said without looking back at his father or Tom. "But make no mistake, Catherine and I will not participate in any cover-up. If the palace PR team tries to spin this, or if Tom's name is wiped from this story, I will go public myself. My mother's voice was silenced once, but I will be damned if I let this palace silence her again to save face for Camilla's family." By 3 o'clock that morning, the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace were buzzing with frantic energy as emergency calls were made to senior advisors, private secretaries, and legal teams. Queen Camilla had been awakened in her private quarters by a tight-lipped aide who whispered the catastrophic news. "The trunk was found open. William knows about the letters, and Tom is at the center of the storm." Camilla sat up in bed, clutching the heavy silk sheets, her heart pounding as the realization washed over her. The single greatest threat to her standing as queen, the absolute worst-case scenario she had feared since joining the royal family, was no longer just a distant worry. It was a living, breathing crisis unfolding right outside her bedroom door. She threw on a robe and hurried down the private stone staircase, her slippers making light, rushing sounds against the ancient floorboards. As she turned the corner toward the king's private study, she saw Charles sitting alone at his grand oak desk, staring blankly at the Diana Confidential folder resting on the polished wood before him. Standing near the window was Tom, looking pale, exhausted, and visibly terrified. Camilla rushed into the room, her voice trembling with a mixture of panic and motherly fury as she looked at her son. "Tom, what have you done?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what you have brought down on this house? Do you have any idea what William is going to do to us?" Tom tried to repeat his defense, explaining that he had been targeted or set up by a document collector. But Camilla cut him off with a harsh sweep of her hand. "Safe. You kept them safe in your trunk," she cried out, her voice breaking. "You brought Princess Diana's private letters into Buckingham Palace on the night of Charles's biggest event. You handed William the exact weapon he has been waiting to use against me for 25 years. He will destroy us, Tom. He will make sure the entire world believes we were stealing his mother's memory, that we were trying to erase her or sell her secrets." She turned to Charles, sinking onto a chair beside the desk, placing her trembling hands over his. "Charles, you have to help him," she begged, her voice raw with desperation. "You know Tom is not a criminal. He was foolish, he was careless, but he did not do this with malice. If this leaks to the press, if William tells the media that Tom had Diana's private documents, the public will tear me apart. They will say I orchestrated it. They will say I never deserved to be queen. Please, Charles, you have to fix this before morning comes." King Charles looked down at his wife, then at her son, and finally at the handwritten letter sitting on his desk. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting loyalties, pitted between the memory of the woman he once hurt, the son who demanded justice for her name, and the wife he had fought for decades to protect. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with the realization that no matter what decision Charles made next, the delicate peace within the royal family had been shattered beyond repair, and by sunrise, the entire world was going to demand answers about what was really hiding inside that black car trunk at by dawn. The desperate attempts by senior palace advisors to contain the leak had completely collapsed, proving that keeping a nuclear secret inside Buckingham Palace is impossible when The heir to the throne has already drawn a line in the blood. The morning papers had not yet hit the stands, but digital newsrooms across London and New York were already receiving anonymous tips about a late-night confrontation in the royal courtyard involving classified state documents and Princess Diana's private archives. Inside Kensington Palace, Prince William had spent the remaining hours of the night pacing his study, refusing sleep, going over every detail of what had been found in the back of Tom Parker Bowles' car. Catherine sat nearby on a velvet sofa, her expression a mix of deep concern and unwavering support as she listened to her husband map out his next move. She knew as well as anyone that breaking protocol and taking a family crisis public would send shockwaves through the constitutional foundations of the UK. But she also understood that stopping William right now was completely impossible. The trauma of his mother's past, the decades of media manipulation, and the bitter resentment toward Camilla's family had all converged into a single, unstoppable force. When the first streaks of morning light hit the London skyline, William looked at Catherine and spoke with a cold, absolute clarity that left no room for debate. "I am not going to let them bury this, Catherine. My mother's memory is not a bargaining chip for their survival, and I am going to tell the world exactly what happened before their PR machine can spin a single lie." By mid-morning, the situation escalated from an internal royal panic to an international media circus. Crowds of reporters, camera crews, and royal fans had already begun swarming the gates of Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace, their microphones raised high, shouting questions across the gates about rumors of a massive family feud, secret police investigations, and missing royal documents. The palace press office, paralyzed by indecision between Charles's camp and Camilla's advisors, maintained a deafening silence. No official statement was issued, no denials were published, and that vacuum of information only fueled the media frenzy into a full-scale panic. Every major news network ran breaking news banners speculating on whether the monarchy was facing its greatest existential crisis since the 1990s. And then, the palace heavy oak doors swung open, and Prince William stepped out onto the steps alongside Catherine. The contrast between this sudden appearance and a standard royal walkabout was instantly visible. William's shoulders were locked, his jaw was set like iron, and his eyes scanned the crowd with a fierce, uncompromising coldness that instantly silenced the chaotic shouting of the reporters. He raised a single hand, and in a surreal display of media obedience, the wall of journalists fell completely silent, waiting with bated breath for the bomb to drop. His voice was steady, perfectly controlled, yet it carried an underlying fire that echoed off the stone walls and straight into the live microphones broadcasting across the globe. "I will not speak long today," William began, his voice cutting cleanly through the morning air, "but I will speak the truth because my mother's memory and dignity demand it." Behind him, Catherine lowered her gaze slightly, her hands tightly clasped, her silent presence acting as a powerful anchor for her husband. "Recently," William continued, his tone sharpening with every word, "I discovered personal belongings and private papers belonging to my late mother, Princess Diana, hidden in a place they should never, ever have been. These were not old history books or public records. They were her private letters, her most intimate fears, her private heart, exposed and neglected in a manner that shows a total lack of respect for her legacy." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd of reporters, and camera shutters fired in a frantic, unbroken rhythm. William did not blink. "I will not go into full details today, but I want the world and the institution to know this clearly. My mother's dignity will not be silenced, not by this palace, and not by anyone seeking to protect their own interests." With those final, devastating words, William turned on his heel, took Catherine by the arm, and walked back inside, leaving the global press corps in absolute, jaw-dropping shock. Within 60 minutes of William stepping back inside Kensington Palace, the digital world exploded. Every major news outlet flashed breaking alerts across millions of screens. Prince William breaks silence on Diana letters inside Buckingham Palace, accusing the institution of grave disrespect. Social media platforms crashed under the sheer volume of traffic as hashtags related to Princess Diana, King Charles, and Queen Camilla trended worldwide. Television commentators stared blankly into studio cameras, debating whether the Prince of Wales had just effectively declared war on his own father's reign. Outside Buckingham Palace, the crowds grew larger and angrier. with royal watchers holding up vintage photographs of Diana, chanting her name as if summoning her spirit to stand once again against the royal establishment. Inside the palace walls, the panic was total and absolute. Senior advisors ran through the corridors holding stacks of unreleased press statements, shouting over one another about how to counter the narrative, while Queen Camilla sat locked in her private drawing room, weeping uncontrollably as she watched her hard-earned crown slip away like sand through her fingers. She knew instinctively that William's public statement had permanently altered public opinion, and no amount of royal spin could ever convince the British public that she and her family were innocent bystanders in this disaster. King Charles sat alone in his private study, the heavy oak doors shut tight against the chaos outside. He had watched his son's broadcast on a small television monitor, and every single word William spoke had felt like a physical blow to his chest. His advisors were frantic, banging on his door, warning him that staying silent would allow William to control the narrative completely, but that speaking out would mean confirming to the world that the rumors were entirely true. Charles held his head in his hands, his face pale and etched with exhaustion. For years, he had tried to balance the impossible roles of being a loving husband to Camilla, a dutiful king to the British people, and a father to a deeply traumatized son. Now all three pillars of his life were collapsing simultaneously. He looked up at the portrait of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, hanging silently on the wall, as if searching for guidance from a monarch who had weathered every storm in modern history. But the portrait offered no answers. Standing up slowly from his desk, Charles made a decision that sent his remaining press team into a state of sheer terror. He instructed his chief secretary to book airtime across all major British television networks for a direct, unscripted address to the nation before the sun went down. When the news broke that King Charles was going to break protocol and address the nation directly on live television, the world held its breath. Camilla had begged him on her knees not to go through with it, sobbing that mentioning Diana or admitting to the security breach would permanently validate William's claims and turn public fury entirely against her. "If you speak of her tonight, you bury me forever," she had cried out, her voice breaking. "Every word you say will place Diana above me, and the people will never forgive my family." But Charles had looked down at her with a heavy, broken gaze, his eyes devoid of the warmth they once held. "Tonight, I am not a king protecting an institution," he had whispered softly. "I am simply a father, and my house is burning down around me." When the red light on the studio camera inside the Buckingham Palace throne room illuminated, millions of viewers across the Commonwealth watched a monarch who looked 10 years older than he had just 48 hours prior. Charles did not use a teleprompter. He spoke directly from a few handwritten notes resting on the podium. He admitted, with a trembling voice, that private papers belonging to Princess Diana had indeed been found where they should never have been stored. He acknowledged the deep, lingering pain this discovery had caused his family, particularly his eldest son, Prince William, whose grief he validated on national television. In a moment of staggering vulnerability that stunned political analysts and royal experts alike, Charles looked straight into the camera lens and took full accountability for the institutional failures that allowed such a breach to happen. "Any failure to protect the memory and dignity of the mother of my children is my burden and mine alone," Charles stated firmly, his voice cracking slightly on the final syllables. "I ask the British people for patience, I ask for healing, and above all, I ask my son to find it in his heart to forgive me for the ways this family has failed him." The speech ended abruptly, leaving the nation in stunned silence. The immediate public reaction was deeply divided and overwhelmingly emotional. Millions of viewers praised the king's raw honesty, seeing it as a rare moment of genuine accountability from a royal figure, while thousands of others flooded the streets outside the palace gates, chanting Diana's name and demanding to know why Camilla's son had possession of her most private letters in the first place. The morning papers the following day featured split-page layouts showing a somber King Charles on one side and a grieving crowd holding pictures of Diana on the other, while Queen Camilla's name was dragged through the mud across every editorial column in the country. Back at Kensington Palace, William and Catherine sat side by side in their private living quarters, listening to the final echoes of the king's broadcast fade from the television speakers. The room was heavy with a profound, suffocating silence. Catherine turned to her husband, Her eyes filled with gentle concern as she reached out to touch his hand, which was still clenched into a tight, frustrated fist. "So William," she asked softly, breaking the quiet, "after all of this, after your father's words tonight, will you forgive him?" William stared out the large glass window into the dark, rain-slicked gardens beyond, his jaw tight, his eyes still burning with unresolved pain and anger. "I don't know, Catherine," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. The truth has finally been spoken out loud, but truth alone does not heal decades of damage. The crown survived the night, the headlines will eventually fade, and the palace walls will be repaired, but the fracture between my father and me, between the reality of our past and the illusion of this monarchy, is broken beyond anything a single speech can fix. And as Catherine squeezed his hand tightly in the dark, watching the storm clouds gather over London once again, she knew that the fire Diana's memory had reignited inside her son would never truly be put out, leaving the future of the British monarchy hanging by a fragile, fraying thread. And that is where the absolute royal nightmare stands today. A family built on centuries of ironclad silence, image management, and PR spin finally had its carefully crafted walls completely shattered by a single car trunk that was not